What if leadership isn't something you grow into, but something that arrives uninvited in the middle of your perfectly good life? This is Unpolished Wisdom, a space for conversations that are beautifully imperfect, raw, unfinished, and deeply human. I'm Dr. Katrina Gisperte, a medical doctor and executive well-being coach. And through my work, I help people navigate transitions with honesty, courage, and compassion. And this podcast is an extension of that mission to explore what it really means to grow, to lead, and to be the author of our own becoming. Today, I'm in conversation with Marcus Marsden. Marcus is the managing partner and director of training at the Works Partnership, an executive coach, leadership developer, and author of Start With Who. His life's work is built around one central idea that who we believe we are is the invisible architecture of everything we produce. That the stories we carry about our own identity, the ones we never stop to examine, are the ones with the most power over us. But in August 2019, Mark Hempstead, the founding partner of our company, the Works Partnership, died suddenly. And Marcus, without warning, became the managing director of a company he had never planned to run. 4 months later, COVID happened and the world shut down. What followed wasn't a story of a reluctant hero discovering his calling. It was something far more honest than that. A man who had a life he loved, who had it changed by circumstances he couldn't control, and who had to ask the very questions he'd spent a career asking others. Who have you decided you are? When did you decide that? And what happens when life forces you to decide again? Hello!
Hello. I was just taking me back listening to that. Yes. All seems so long ago. But yes,
Okay,
no, it's great to be here.
I think we need to give the audience a little bit of a background on our relationship too.
Okay.
Which is I've known Marcus for a decade now.
Yeah, must be by now.
Yeah, a decade now when I did the Newfield program.
Yeah.
A decade ago. And, when after I did Newfield, I already joined the company, working with Mark, etc. But you've been with the company for far longer than I have. So could you
Yes.
walk me down memory lane a little bit? How did it begin for you?
Okay. Well, of course, like any story, it depends where you want to start, but I'll give you the shorter version. So I'd left university, didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I had family history that was about, the two male figures in my life, my dad, my stepdad, had both gone into business. So I kind of rolled into business really and into marketing, which I loved in Unilever. Did that, pretty much 15 years. And then really the last 2 or 3 years of that, I'd really decided that marketing wasn't for me. And I discovered this world of coaching and training. This was around the year 99, 2000 in the UK, and started exploring really. And then through a variety of events, I ended up meeting Mark Hempstead and one of his partners, Amelia, and they were doing delivery of leadership work in Unilever. They liked me, I liked them, and that's the short version that ended up with me joining TWP in end of 2001, basically.
Okay.
And then, but then here we are.
And so what were you doing at the time for TWP? You were running corporate, if I remember.
Well, when I joined, that was the company had a big public, i.e. non-corporate self-awareness leadership work was really the heart of it. And the company was really in the early stages of taking that into corporate, which is what they were doing in Unilever. And I think they saw in me the possibility of bridging those two worlds, because I'd already done quite a lot of personal development work with another company. And so I was already in that journey. And so I came a bit, oven ready for them. And I went from there, really.
Yeah. Let's go into Mark passing away, right? In 2019, very sudden, unexpected.
Yeah.
Nobody was prepared for it.
Yeah. Least of all Mark.
Exactly. For sure. Too soon. Okay. But, and I remember you calling me. I was in Hawaii.
Yeah, I remember exactly where you were at a wedding, if I remember right.
Yeah, my sister's wedding. The day after my sister's wedding, and just absolutely floored. I mean, all of us.
Yeah.
Absolutely floored. So what was your your reaction to that? What was it like for you?
Wow. Uh, it's very difficult now. I mean, that was 2019. Here we are, 2026. And it's like any memory. It's like any memory of anything. You look at it, as you look back on it, it's difficult sometimes to pull apart what I think of it now through the interpretation, the analysis of it looking back versus what was it like in that moment. It's difficult to pull those apart. That said, I do remember Teeny, who's our founding partner with Mark, ringing me, and the first thing she said was, "You're going to need to sit down," and then it all went from there. Uh, it was profound shock. I mean, I think that was the thing. I mean, it was just so, it was unexpected, but it was tragic. It was just an accident. Without going into the details, it
Of
was
course.
just an accident. It was just
Yeah.
a freak accident in a hotel. And he was, I was meant to speak with him at 5 o'clock that night. He didn't ring. And I was like, what the hell is he? He said he was going to ring at 5 o'clock. He had a pretty good excuse, as it turned out. So it took a while. It did. It took a little while for it to really sink in. But then, of course, I had to start telling other people. Teeny said, well, can you speak to these
Yeah.
other people? And I was like, okay. And I always remember as well, Sari, my wife, wasn't home. So I got this news on my own, sitting in the apartment. And so I had about an hour on my own, and it was National Day, Singapore.
Yeah.
And I had to, so there was lots, I was watching the TV because a friend of mine was playing in the band on the stage. So it was a lot, it was very intense, lots of things going on. And one thing I do remember was it was almost like everything had slowed down. It was almost like one of those movie moments where the action kind of slowed down, and I was like, okay, I know I'm in the middle of something now, and I could see that, but I didn't know what was going to happen, how I was going to respond. But it was very much slowed down, and I could see myself in the action somehow. But it was weird because as you kind of intimated, my life was going along one path, and then it was clearly going to go along a different path, but I didn't know what that was.
Yeah. And so let's go back into you telling us, me included, that he had passed away. When was that moment that you knew, as the number two in the company, that all of us basically had landed on your shoulders?
Well, okay, that's an interesting framing. I didn't feel that. I think the great thing that Mark and Teeny had created was a company where we did have a boss, and it was Mark, but we really were all in it together. And I think
That's true.
so. It never felt. I can honestly say it's never felt like a burden in terms of on me in that sense. It did shift, and it really. I mean, Teeny and I sat down and said, right, what are we going to do? And the agreement that Teeny and I basically came to was that she would be the founding partner and she would do what she does, but she wanted, and I wanted to, okay, I'll step up. Mark was already grooming me to do that, but if you know anything about Mark, he was going to be grooming me to do that for the rest of his life. So so he was, but so when he wasn't there, suddenly it was a big hole.
It was.
Because again, I'm conscious, obviously a lot of people didn't know Mark, but anyone who did know Mark watching or listening to this, he was a force of nature. I mean, so
sure.
it was a big space to replace in the company.
Yeah. And was there a point when you finally did step up, which you did, right? To take on that role, to create your own space, not to take on Mark's space. Was there a grieving for perhaps, the perfectly fantastic life you were leading? Because I know we were already friends and colleagues at that point, and you always enjoyed corporate. You always enjoyed the work that you were doing. You were perfectly happy to keep on doing that.
No, I think did I grieve for it in a classic kind of transition sense? No, but I think I've paid prices along the way.
Okay. Tell me more about that.
Well, I think in terms of relationship, I mean, the most obvious one is with Sari, my wife, because I think the biggest thing, if I go back up a level for a moment, the biggest thing I noticed and learned really in that whole experience is how different it is to be the number two and the number one. It's not just a small game. difference. It's completely different. And that did blindside me. I thought, well, I've been number 2 for a while. And, Mark had been, to be fair to Mark, he had been stepping back and I had been taking the reins more, but he was still the boss, and then immediately he wasn't there. That is a completely different game. And that did surprise me. And so I did what I always do, which is basically I just buried myself in making that work. And so things like relationships, like with Sari, but also with yourself and other people, friends, family, paid some prices. And I think I only realized that further down the line.
Like what? What are the prices?
Well, I mean, at a simple level, just I wasn't as around as much with Sari. I mean, we were living in the same apartment, but there was this third thing that had come in. There was me, there was her, and then there was the job had always been there, but she was working too. So we both had jobs, but suddenly my job got a lot bigger. And so it just I just allowed it to take up more space. And that was mental space, physical space, and emotional space. So that took us a while to work through that. And I think it would be fair to say, I don't think you can ever go back. So I don't think you can turn back to how it was. But for me and Sari, I think over those 6 years, that's been a journey that we've both been on in terms of creating a partnership where that role, which is a bigger role. I mean, that's it is a bigger role. How our marriage and our our life works with that. And she's made big changes too. She's obviously stepped into the company.
Yeah.
She's now a trainer, etc. So it's not just been me. That's been a big part of the journey that I've been on, because it's not just been my journey. It's been we've been in it, as a network of people.
No, completely. And all of our relationships have shifted. Our roles have shifted.
Absolutely.
Our responsibilities have shifted since then.
Well, yeah, and I think that has been a big part, and I think this is where I have grown into it, which is, and Tina and I said this immediately after the initial shock when we looked at the company. I said to her, "Look, Tina, we're the best one in the world. You and Mark ran it a certain way. You and me are going to run it differently. I can't run it like Mark ran it. Mark, if you know me, you know Mark. We're very different characters, and I think that created a very different space for the people around in the company. And that's been something that's been me finding my own leadership swing, I think. But I knew immediately I couldn't do it like Mark. I mean, that was clear.
Yeah.
But I didn't know what I was going to
also
do.
more a promoter controller in our behavioral styles
Yes.
distinction. And you're more of an analyzer.
Yeah, just more easygoing. That's the big
Exactly.
shift.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
And there are payoffs and prices to that too.
there are. Yeah.
And pop quiz. So what are the payoffs and prices?
Well, I think the first couple of years, maybe, well, even now, maybe. I mean, really, I should ask you this question because you've been on the other side of it. But I think for me, what I see is it's been a big exhale. Mark was very much drive, push, let's go again, let's go again, let's go again. So it's kind of very much sympathetic nervous system driven. And that was great. And that created the company, with Teeny together, but that was really the driving force. And I'd been in that for almost 20 years with him, really. And I think when I took over, it was a bit, I run it the other way, really, which is a bit, and as you say, it's the same coin with just two sides, so it's been a very different, I think if you spoke to everyone in the company, who's been experienced both, it would be a very different experience.
No, definitely. And experiencing that, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic experience with two different leaders is one thing. And then add in the complexity of March 2020 and the world shuts down. And I remember this so well. Like we were on a Teams meeting and we just said, oh my God, now what?
Yeah.
We lost trainings, right? Things that we usually fly into to run. Just, we didn't know whether they were going to happen or how they were going to happen. And we had never done online trainings at that point.
Not really. No, it's amazing to think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what was going on for you as the whole world kind of said we're closing borders? We couldn't leave Singapore.
Right. Well, I think it's very funny, I've been thinking about this because, I knew we were going to talk about it. And I think it's going to may sound a little strange, but I think in a funny way, having lost Mark, 3 or 4 months before, 4 or 5 months before that, when COVID hit, of course it was a big hit, but it was like, well, okay, but we've already had one big hit. We can deal with this one as well. So it was that. So I think that was a big part of it, actually. Now, as I started thinking about this, but I'll tell you the other big thing, and I really believe this about our work that we do, which is someone taught me a long time ago, as one of my mentors said, conversations only exist when you allow them to exist. And that was the thing that I really brought to the whole COVID piece, which is, yes, there's a pandemic, but everything else is made up about it. And so whether we could easily have gone under, and I go, it's training won't work, and we can't do this, we can't do that. It's the end, training can't. And I remember that was one of the lines I drew in the sand. And so, no, I'm just not allowing that conversation. So thank you for sharing, whoever's sharing it, but that's not how we're going to do this. And that's what I would call bringing our work to our work. We did that, and we all did that. It wasn't just me, but that was a line that I certainly drew in the sand. And I think that's based on results that served us well.
No, definitely. And ironically, the COVID years were some of our best
Exactly.
years.
Yes.
Yeah, in training. So for those who are listening who are not familiar with our work, what do you mean by I'm not allowing us to have that conversation of it's all breaking down, it's not possible, we can't do this, we can't deliver a training?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a big question, but I think a lot of my life, and I brought it to the Mark situation as well, really comes from my interest in philosophy and things like that over the college and things. And the central premise of that, if I simplify it, is the world just worlds. The world is out there, and and it's going to world long after you and I are dead and gone. The world just worlds. There's no way it should be. There's no way it ought to be. It doesn't owe you a living. It just does what it does. And then everything else really depends on how you see it. And that is what I'm pointing to when I say the conversations that you allow to exist. So as I look at an event, and COVID's a good example, I can see it this way, I can see it that way, and I can choose to see it in lots of different ways. Now, sometimes people get a bit angry about that and say, well, you're downplaying it. Or my parents died in COVID. And I said, no, it's not. But it's not that. It doesn't mean I'm going, hey, COVID, let's have a great time. It's not like pretending it's okay. That's different. But what it is about is saying it's out there. Now, I, as a human being, have the ability to respond to that, to choose the conversations that I have about that. And that is one of the key grounding points, as of our work, really.
Yeah. And you've always pointed to the fact that events are neutral.
Yes.
That may irk some people a little bit, I think, when we say that events are neutral because of the emotion that comes with certain events. Can we go a little bit personal? I said, okay, I want to ask for permission to ask that. Your parents' divorce.
Yeah, it's classic. It's easy, and I've talked about it so many times. I mean, it's like, and that's one of my, when I talk about it. But as I do that, I'm quite happy to talk about that. But as I do that, I'm conscious that other people have other things that have a lot more emotional attachment in their past. I mean, I've worked with people who've had all sorts of, let's just say things happen to them as children. You can fill in the blanks that, really shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
And again, it's not for me to say, when I say they're neutral, it's not that I'm belittling that in any way, but what I am saying is if you have something that happened to you, let's say it's a 5-year-old little boy, little girl, if I'm speaking to them now and I'm coaching them, for example, and they're 35, 45, I'm going, okay, yes, and the way you're looking at that event right now, today, 40 years later, that is in your hands. Because there are some people who go through events like that and they find it very difficult and they hang on to the old meanings and that has consequences. There are other people who Go, okay, that happened, it's done. Here's how I'm going to choose to look at it. And that has different consequences. And again, that's really the underpinning of my work, which is there are always consequences.
Yeah.
As a coach, it's not for me to tell you how to look at the events in your life. That's a really a critical piece. I can hold the mirror up and say, how are you choosing to look at that event? But that's not the same as me saying you should look at it differently. And that's another reason why sometimes people get backed up, is they think that I'm telling them they should look at it differently. And I'm not. I'm just saying, if you continue to look at it like that, will it be productive for you? Will it create, can you use your meaning to create the life that you say you want? If you can, great, keep doing that. If you're not, then let's talk. And that's really the spirit of my work, really.
Yeah. But what's the difference with that and toxic positivity?
Okay, the easy way to talk about that is, and the way I tend to talk about it in the trainings, is Viktor Frankl. I always like the light events. So concentration camps. He wrote a very famous book called Man's Search for Meaning, and I use this in the work sometimes because people will ask about that. I mean, even not toxic positivity, just what's the other phrase? Positive psychology. It's all about being okay. And it's like, well, there's a big distinction. So Viktor Frankl, survivor of Auschwitz, etc. What the central thing, one of the key things was he saw how he and some people around him, even in circumstances like a concentration camp, can still choose the meaning they attach to that. Mm-hmm. And he said that, and he could see that there was consequences to that. But the example I use, which is a bit trite, but it makes the point, which obviously he's passed away now, but if he was here now and he sat next to me, he wouldn't be pretending that Auschwitz was good. It was like, oh, positive, Auschwitz was fine. He wouldn't be saying that. He'd be saying, no, it was dreadful. It was awful. It was one of the worst, but he was still able to choose his way of seeing it, his way of looking at it, his perspective on it. Right. But that's not the same thing as pretending it was positive. Yeah. It's not the same at all. That can, if you collapse that distinction, again, people often get quite rightly get riled about that.
I've known you also personally. You're a very close friend of my family's. My kids adore you and Sari, but you're a brilliant coach, really, you are. The one who always asks, I don't want to say the right questions. You ask powerful questions. But then again, leading a team operationally, leading us, is very different from coaching.
Yeah, it is.
As we both know.
It is.
What was the hardest part of that shift?
Well, I think the hardest part, there were two. The first part that was hard was really looking myself in the mirror and saying, do I want to do it? If I'm honest. See, do I want to really step up? And because there were other options. We could have got someone else in. Teeny could have done it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like it was a have to for me by any means, but I had to go through that process of, okay, do I really want to do it? And this is the second part, and this is a bit is actually not in your introduction of me, which is another question, which is not just who am I becoming and who am I being, but critically also, who do I believe I can become?
Oh, I like that.
And that's really powerful, because that's like the invisible shroud, if you like. Yeah. My point of view is it's very unlikely you will create and become anything that you don't really, in your heart, believe is possible for you. You'll always find a story or a justification. Yeah, I like analogies. It's like the Dementors, hanging over Hogwarts. It's got that kind of feel to it. You can't really see them very much, but they're kind of shadowy figures, and and so that is a big question, and I had to really grapple with that. And my first answer to that was no. I don't think I can really do this. And I had my own coach, and worked with a coach and some two or three actually mentors who supported me through that self-doubt, really. And
but what was it? What was it that you, Oxford graduate, very smart, very high up in Unilever, you have so many stripes on you, so it's very hard to believe that Marcus thought he couldn't do this.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the styles before. You see, so there's promoters, controllers. My style is much more analytical, and a classic. The analytical style typically sees a problem, because we're good problem solvers. So it's not so much whether, the glass half empty, glass half full, yeah, or, what's it full of? Maybe it's full of poison. It's like there's always something. Like there has to be. So, because I think that's what I ran into. I wasn't conscious of that at the time, but that is something as I look back, I certainly see now that was something that I for me, I just needed to go through that, and it was only really by producing results, I think that I really conquered that belief that I was able to become the leader. The leader stroke boss, which is an interesting dynamic in itself. I think
Okay.
maybe my doubt was less about my leadership and more about my ability to really boss it.
What do you mean by that? Because it's
Well,
could be the same for a lot of people.
yeah, so boss would be, again, shorthand in my world. I've got the stripes. So so just because I've got the stripes, but it doesn't mean I'm good at instruction, telling how many by when. What people would call management, which is an important part. I mean, if you think about them as conversations, management conversation, leadership conversation, etc. I think leadership conversations, I think I probably did have a belief I would be able to handle. But I think the weaker muscle for me was, did I really think I had the capability maybe to really do the management conversations? And I still think it's a weaker muscle for me, quite frankly. It's not my strength. But again, based on results, we have found a way through that, and it's worked so far.
Yeah, no, definitely. So would you say it was a reinvention of identity? Was it an integration of a different identity? What would you say that process was for you?
Well, that depends a little bit on what you mean by identity. That I think it's asked of me. If we go back to what I said about events, so the event was neutral. Okay, so I've got the opportunity to step in, and then how am I going to do it? How am I going to see that? Am I going to see it like a burden? Am I going to see it like I have to? Am I going to see it like, this is something I'm choosing to do? There's all sorts of different ways I could see it. And really that frame was the key. I think once I really did choose into it, then I found ways to make it work. I'm going to guess, although it's clearly not a subject that I'm familiar with, parenting might be the same.
Oh yeah.
Which would be, once you go, okay, am I going to have kids? Am I not going to have kids? Am I going to be a parent? All that. And then once you do it, you find a way to make it work. Doesn't mean you're perfect, and I'm certainly not perfect as a leader or a boss, but you find a way through. And I think so. It's more about your identity. I don't know what the best word. I would say that growing, expanding, really. So it's like it. One of the things that I'm increasingly talking about with any kind of coaching or training is it's more about, I think a more helpful frame for people is range, not change.
Ooh, I like that.
I knew you'd like that. That's why I was
really
saving that
like
for you.
that.
Okay. Because change implies there's something right now that's not working, or I need to change. There's something that's not that needs to be different. Whereas range is more about, okay, so whatever I'm doing right now at some level is working because it's got me here where I'm, and that's okay, but I can add to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very big shift for a lot of people. I think one of the things that gets in the way for people in, let's call it a development context, whether it's a training or coaching or anything, is they think they're being asked to give something up or make something wrong about themselves as they currently are. And my point of view is, no, actually, the way you are, that's great. We love that. That's all fine. And you can grow and you can develop. I mean, a very simple, and you've seen me do this a million times, forehand and backhand.
Yeah.
So forehand, and I've got topspin, I've got slice, I've got lobs, I've got smashes. There's all sorts of things. And so it's adding to who I currently am rather than trying to change who I currently am. And I think there's, again, an old truism really, which is people don't resist change as much as they resist being changed. You see, and I think that's very different. It's very different. And so a lot of what I see a lot of what I see out there let's say, in this kind of world, I think consciously or not, sets up resistance with people. And I think there's other ways to approach it.
Okay. Other ways, meaning looking at it differently?
Yeah, like range. So you
Okay.
don't need to change it. You don't need to, one of my hobby horses that you know, okay, you don't need to brace, unlearn anything. You don't need to do that. You don't need to unlearn it. You just need to realize that it's not the only way. That's different, you see, and that is a big thing. I think trying to unlearn something, it's kind of like trying to unlearn how to tie your shoelaces. Good luck.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't really work. It sounds great, but when you really look at it, it doesn't really work and it doesn't really make sense.
So in your book, Start With Who,
Mm,
you write that who we believe we are
Yeah.
and who we believe we can become
Yes.
is the invisible context that
Yes.
shapes everything
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
we produce.
Yeah.
And dare I say, before 2019, before August 2019, when Mark passed away, you had an identity, a way of looking at yourself, a way of being. It fit like a second skin. Everything was working then.
Mhm.
You didn't have to examine it too much. It worked,
Yeah.
right? But when the role changed, what did you discover about that narrative for yourself? What had you been carrying that really had to shift to allow the new context, the new second skin, the new belief to actually settle in?
That's a good question. I think I think the biggest thing that looking back on it, not just from today, but from 2020, let's say, was that I'd found some very good justifications for playing safe. So I was playing a good game. If you looked at my life from the outside, it was fine and it was great. And I was, like you said, I was happy with it. But as I look back on it, I'd find some very good, as analytical styles always can, some reasons and justifications for staying in a box. And really, I'd been in a similar box since I'd come to Asia. Since I jumped out of one box in marketing and Unilever and Europe, and then I'd come over to Asia, personal development, leadership, and TWP. And that was a big shift. And then really I'd been in that box and I'd become very adept. I'd learned the job and I'd become skilled at it and I was good in that box. And I think after Mark's passing, I think I realized that actually it was a little inconvenient, but what I realized was I could expand my box. And I didn't really need to look at that while Mark was around, quite frankly. But I'd been playing safe, especially for the last 3 or 4 years, I think, looking back. I'd found justifications for staying safe. I think that was the big thing.
What was the biggest risk you took?
One of the things that I've really discovered in my journey in the last 6 years is, for me, I'm not saying this is a truism, but I think moving from number 2 to number 1 in the business, I almost always, the thing that's worked is going against my gut.
You told me this.
Yeah. So what my gut says, what my tendencies is to hit the forehand. But actually, what works more often than not for me has been to do the opposite and to run round my forehand and hit a backhand, essentially, if you want the metaphor, which is weird. But and I don't know whether that's true. I'm not going to make that a truism, but it has worked for me, definitely.
Yeah.
So it's for me going outside of what I know and trusting. I think maybe trust is a big word, which is trusting that I can make other things work. I can be effective outside of my comfort zone. I think maybe that's underneath at least part of that.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about your intuition, your gut. So you said a little bit, right, that actually what I've been doing so far, my forehand, basically, you know what? I'll just do the complete opposite. I'll do a 180. I'll do the opposite of that. I'll do the backhand. So which part is your intuition? Which part is your gut telling you to do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know really. I mean, I'm not sure what's gut versus what's easy. What's gut versus what's comfortable.
That's a good
is my
distinction.
gut, what's my gut? Gut is just
Yeah.
obviously it's really it's a phrase, but so when we're talking about this kind of area, I think, and again, this is maybe a little different with Mark, uh, is one of the things which I think I'd always known intellectually, but I think I've lived it, although you could again be a better judge, is coming to terms with I don't need to do it all myself.
Mm.
And so offering space for people to grow into, but also inviting people in to contribute to where are we going next? What should we do? What shouldn't we do? So I like it. There is still a hierarchy and I have got the stripes, etc. But I like it more. I find I do my best work when I've got other inputs coming at me that I can integrate or synthesize or sometimes say no to,
Yeah.
but working with that rather than being the one that always has to come up with this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
That I find that other people can make that work, to be
Yeah.
clear, but that's not really in my game.
Yeah. No, for sure. There's something you said earlier that I want to sit with, if that's okay. You mentioned about who you believe you can become.
Mm.
And for me, another word for it, it's a bit of an identity transformation. And that requires a lot of courage.
Yes.
It's not for the weak, so to speak. So it's not, for me, it's not about ambition. It's actually not about strategy. I think it's much more about courage. Specifically, the courage to let go of a story about self that has already served you,
Mm-hmm.
right? What else has opened up for you aside from the work, being managing partner, opportunities? What else has it actually opened up for you that you didn't think was possible before?
Well, again, one of the facets of our work, which you're very familiar with as well, is that really it shows up in relationship and conversation. And so when I did start allowing that different possibility in about who I can become, it's impacted all my relationships. But really, the relationships with my dads in particular started when in my first, I would say my first entry, if you like, into personal work. And, my early 30s, classic time as, with mums and dads and all those kind of things. And I think that opened up a possibility. And so there was a lot of kind of growth around that time. And then, it settled a little bit as it would and probably should. And then as my parents got older, my mum passed away with cancer, 13 years ago now. And then my father really passed away, 2 or 3 years ago. And now I'm on my third parent, which is my biological father. And I'm very close with all of them. And I think all of those relationships, even though my mum passed away before I took over as managing partner, they all benefited from my widening of who I believed I could be at the time. And it all required, I think as identity always does. You see, we're going to do a program on identity coming up, as you know, and one of the things that I think for me is important with identity is where does it live?
Yeah.
You see, so at one level it lives in me, but in another level, my identity really exists in your experience of me. And then in another level, in a very real sense, it exists in the middle. So there's kind of three places for it. There's how I see myself, there's how you see me, and then there's how you see me when I'm with you. So there's three very important places, I think, that identity shows up. And I think that's especially true, again, if I just talk for myself, that's especially true with my parents. I think how I showed up and continue to show up with my dad, and how that has, it's just expanded, I think. It's a bit of a loose phrase, but that's the best way I can put it. It's just expanded in terms of what's possible now.
And what's different? What's different from before? I'm assuming they weren't bad relationships before.
No, not at all. I think in general, with all three of them, but particularly with my biological dad, is a notional space. There's a lot more emotional space. Without, hopefully he'll never listen to this. So, without characterizing him too much, he was a classic, British, someone you might, classic British formal guy, who grew up he was in business in the 60s, the 70s. That was a certain era. And there was that, stiff upper lip and, pretty much like that. And then over time, of course, he's changed as well. He's developed and he's grown. It's not just me. So he's growing and developing and opening. He was definitely done that. And I still remember, I can't say it was the first time I ever hugged him, but probably the first time I ever hugged him as an adult. And it was like a shock to both of us, really. But there was more room to emotionally connect rather than just intellectually father-son kind of thing. And that was a big moment for me and for him, as he's told me subsequently. So that would be the kind of, not the easy way, but the simplest way of putting it, I think. Emotional space.
Yeah. And what has shifted for you or widened, expanded for you in terms of relationships with us as your team? What's possible now that perhaps 6 years ago?
Well, the thing is, there's no one answer to that. You see, that's what's flicking through my mind. I mean, if I think about the different characters, the different individuals in the team, there is no one answer for that. But okay, I'll talk about you because you're the one in front of me. If I think about where you were, or I should say my experience of where you were 6 years ago, you were very much finding your way.
Totally.
You and Mark really worked together. I was kind of beginning to run the company over here, but you and Mark were really doing your thing. It was largely about health coaching at that point, and you were developing that. That was great. And I didn't really get involved in that. And then when I took over, Mark had been a big part of you coming into the company and, mentor for you. And so you were kind of finding your feet again.
Oh, totally.
But that was then, this is now. And if I look at you now, the way I am with you now is very different to how in my experience, I needed to be with you then. And so it's that growth. And again, it's the two-way piece, which is, what do I think is necessary for the business, for the growth of the business? But then what do you see as important for you in your growth? And then making sure that there is that, win-win. Otherwise, like you've heard me say this, otherwise why bother being in the team? Why bother being in a team unless you're putting something in for other people, but also letting them contribute to you? Otherwise, we don't need a team. Let's go our separate ways. And so I think with you, that would be my experience, which is finding that space. And you found your space, and I've created space for you to step into, and that's the way it should be. It's a kind of combination. And again, as one of our sayings, based on results, you've really stepped up and taken more space, which has been great.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think for the listeners here and those who are managing teams or are grappling with managing teams, it's always a co-creation. It's always about what is possible in conversation. And I think, and you also like to say this, we like to say this in the company, which is there are no difficult conversations. There are just conversations you don't want to have.
Yes.
And we've had our fair share of conversations we've not want to have.
For sure.
For
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely.
But I've always felt that after those conversations we did not want to have, our relationship has always been better, exponentially.
I totally agree. I mean, yes. And I think, again, for me, you put your finger on something there that I think has been part of my growth in the 6 years, whereas part of my hiding, the last 2 or 3 years when Mark was still around, was I didn't need to have those because Mark actually enjoyed having difficult conversations. So
That's true.
he would create the conversations. And I didn't need to do it, really. And that was a good example of something tangible where I didn't really need to step into that. And then when he wasn't there, I absolutely needed to step into that because that's an important part. None of us, given that we all live in some kind of comfort zone by definition as human beings, if you really want to be productive, if I really want to be productive and grow the business results, it's going to require me to step outside sometimes. I can't just stay in the comfort zone and expect to win. It doesn't work like that, So I need to do a bit of both. Sometimes, yeah, but other times outside.
Yeah.
And this is a good example.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So for my last question, and this is the way that I close the podcast, I ask all my guests this. If you were to hold space for your past self, what would you say to him now?
I think I would say it's very difficult, because I think the journey that I've been on has been the journey I needed to be on. So I'm not sure I'd change anything, interestingly, which isn't to say it's been perfect, but I think the downs, the disappointments, the frustrations have actually been a key part of where we are now. So, but having said that, if there was one thing, I would say, you're okay.
Mm,
You'll be okay. I think that's what I would say.
I love that. Thank you. It's so much fun with
Yeah, it's
you.
good. I enjoyed it. It's very nice.
Thank
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for being here.
You're very welcome.
The story Marcus carried about himself, about who he was, what he was capable of, what kind of leader he could be, was invisible to him right up until the moment it wasn't. That's how identity works. It hides in plain sight until it forces you to look. We don't always get to choose the timing of our becoming. Sometimes becoming chooses us. Follow the show so you don't miss our next conversation. And if today's episode was meaningful to you, please share it with someone who might need it. This is Unpolished Wisdom. Until next time.